Welcome back. So we now have our nice, shiny new bot pawn, and we're actually possessing that pawn upon playing the game, except there's really nothing to do. We can engage, but we can't really move around or anything like that. In fact, if we detach by using Shift F1 to get our mouse cursor and clicking on detach and moving and looking around, we don't even see that gray sphere anymore that the default pawn had. We don't even have that in our pawn. Our pawn really just has its root component, which is a scene component. And that has no mesh, no visual representation, no collision. It just has its own transform. So in this video, we're going to add some components to our bot pawn to make it more interesting. And we can start with a visual representation. We want to be able to see our pawn. So what we can do is add a new component, and I'm going to start with a static mesh component. So I'm going to choose static mesh, and I'm going to call this bot mesh. And for the static mesh, I'm going to choose SM drone. So we now have this SM drone attached to our scene component, which is the root. And I'm going to take that bot mesh, drag it onto the default scene root to get rid of the scene component and replace it with my bot mesh. Now the mesh is the root component. Now let's go ahead and compile and go back to our testing level and press play. Let's see what happens. Well, seemingly nothing because we can't see anything. We can't move around. We can't see our bot. If we press play, and right away, just detach, and we look down, well, we can see that we're looking from just above that pawn. And that's the default location of our point of view. If we want to customize where our point of view is in relation to the root component, we need to add a camera component to our pawn. If we add a camera component, we can then determine where our point of view will be as we possess the pawn. So to our bot mesh, we're going to add a new component, and we're going to search for camera and choose camera. Now, this is what the camera component looks like, a blue camera. In fact, we can move it back with the translation gizmo and see the full camera in all its glory. Now, the camera is not visible in the game. We can only see it here in the viewport for the pawn blueprint. If we were to drag one of these pawns into the level, like so, we could see the camera component there. But if we press play, we cannot see the camera component. It's hidden in the game. But we see that our point of view is changed. It's now here behind the drone mesh. But if we detach, we can zoom out and see that that camera is invisible. Now, why do we see two pawns? Because I dragged one in. That's the one to the left. The one to the right is the one that we are possessing. That's automatically spawned in, thanks to the game mode. So I'm going to delete this pawn that I dragged in, and I'm going to go back to my pawn blueprint, and I'm going to move this camera back and up, like so, and go back and press play, and now we can see the pawn there. We still can't move around, but we can at least see it. So a camera component allows us to specify where our point of view should be when we're possessing a pawn, and we can offset it from the root component, and because it's attached to the root component, it will keep its relative offset. But adding a camera and moving it back like this away from the root component is not actually the right way to add a camera. You see, there exists another type of component designed for the camera to be attached to, and that is a spring arm. So let's click on our root component, which is the bot mesh, click add, and search for spring arm, and get a spring arm component. Notice that it's this red line here, and we have that translation gizmo right here at the root component. The spring arm is also invisible in the game. We won't be seeing that red line during the game. It's just for visualization here. And in fact, if we don't have the spring arm selected, we don't see that red line anymore. But we'd like to attach our camera component to the spring arm component. We know how to do that. All we have to do is click and drag the camera onto the spring arm. But our camera had an offset because we moved it away from the mesh. We have to zero that out. So for the location in the details panel, we can hit that curved arrow and zero out that location. And now our camera is attached to the spring arm, which if we select, we can see the red line. And our spring arm allows us to have a camera attached at the end, and the camera will be pointed down the length of that spring arm at the root component. And we can adjust the target arm length. It's here in the details panel. If we adjust it, we'll see that our camera conveniently moves along with the end of the spring arm. And if we go and change our spring arm's rotation by taking that middle value and adjusting it, we can see that our spring arm rotates and our camera rotates with it. And this can be quite convenient. So I could leave that at negative 20 degrees and we have an angle here. And now if we go and play test, we are looking at the pawn from this angle and this distance. A spring arm is a really nice type of component because our camera by default can collide with things like walls. And if we back up against a wall and the camera hits it, it'll shrink down along that spring arm. The spring arm will shorten to accommodate, and we'll see how that works soon once we start implementing movement. So now our bot pawn is looking a lot less empty, right? We have a visual representation, we have a camera, so we're determining where the point of view will be. We just need to be able to move our pawn, and we're going to do that next. Excellent job. I'll see you soon.